We're continuing our discussion from the last time on the impact of organizational culture on mentoring relationships within our churches and organizations. Without understanding the dynamics of structure and its importance, we will inevitably be controlled by something we do not even recognize or understand. Unlike King Saul, we really shouldn't be creating an atmosphere or a culture, if you will, that makes it acceptable to throw spears at the next generation. But to change the culture of an organization, you can't begin by changing the outward activities or just what is visible without changing the values that are underlying those actions.
Welcome to Leadership Matters with Dr. Phil. His podcast discusses matters of leadership that really matter. Phil has had the privilege of mentoring leaders and coaching ministry teams around the world for several decades, and he's really looking forward to sharing with you some of the principles that have been so helpful for others. Leadership is about serving others, not power or position. Regardless of our context, family, job, ministry, or any circle of influence, we all have the potential to be this kind of leader. A foundational leadership skill that is often overlooked is mentoring intelligence. This series is based on the materials Phil has developed over a lifetime and taught in a variety of cultural contexts. To access all of our podcasts as well as our bonus leadership resources, just click the links in the description below or go to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters or icmcanada.org/mentoring-intelligence. So now, let's join Phil as he discusses some leadership matters.
Well, welcome back. We're talking about culture and how that impacts mentoring relationships. And the culture of a church is based upon the values, the beliefs, and the assumptions of the leadership and its members, as we were looking at last time. It's also based upon the combined experiences of the members as they deal with life together. As new members and leaders join the church, their new beliefs, values, and their assumptions affect the development of the culture within that group, because they may vary from the existing group. This then affects mentoring relationships also. Without a right kind of ministry structures and the corresponding culture, succeeding generations will not have the opportunity to receive the full benefit of mentoring relationships. We need to view all of our activities through the values of a servant leadership model, as well as the various factors which will impact a mentoring culture in our organizational structures. These values and assumptions must first be understood if we're going to be able to make the changes necessary to foster mentoring relationships. To just force change, as I mentioned, rarely works, because it's a hard issue. It's a values issue. Again, this is why we spent so much time discussing the values of servant leadership and how this impacts mentoring. Without transformation at a values level, mentoring becomes just another program, and it's not really life-giving. To force widespread change overnight usually results in church splits, chaos in the organization, and wounded people lying in the ditch along the road of yet another great idea by the leadership. This happens because leadership does not take the time to understand what the assumptions and values of the group are, which is causing the problems. Having not understood this, it's impossible for them to begin the healthy process that is needed to help move people in a new direction. Let me illustrate it with a simple diagram. Values and underlying assumptions are unseen, which is why they can be so frustrating as they act upon us and we don't really sometimes even know what's happening. So let's say we belong to the rectangle group. The values and assumptions of everyone is rectangles. We love rectangles. We believe in rectangles. This is reflected in our visible actions and culture. We have a culture of rectangles based on our values. Now suppose we want or need to change from a group believing in rectangles to a group who believes in triangles. We believe triangles now is the way of the future. What we typically do at this point is focus our energies on changing the outward actions of the group. We draw rectangles, have rectangles around the church, make everything, switch it all to triangles, make sure there's no rectangles anywhere in the church. This is all the stuff above the line in the diagram, the stuff that's visible. But this usually leads to conflict and church splits. Why? Why does that happen? Well, because at a deeper level, even an unconscious level, people are still believing rectangles are the way to go. In their heart, they see rectangles. They've been committed to rectangles for years. Remember, culture eats new vision for lunch unless we approach things differently. So how do we make a change from a rectangle to a triangle culture? To begin with, we need to focus on the values and assumptions of the group, not the outward culture. Once the values change, then changing the corresponding outward activities or the culture, the way we do things around here, isn't really not all that difficult. Of course, it takes time and intentionality. But if a group is based, for example, on a hierarchical, power-driven leadership model, even if nice biblical terms are used, and we try to force these mentoring relationships, then you know what? It'd be like talking something to people that's almost impossible for them to understand. People don't share those values. They see ministry in this context maybe as competitive or as a zero-sum game or as a means to climb the ladder of success. So no, the leadership has to change the values first. That's what has to change. It has to be a heart transformation. Only then will mentoring be possible. Trying to change the way we do things without changing the values only causes frustration. This is why inserting mentoring in a rigid top-down organization structure never works. So changing the culture of the church requires unlearning certain values and assumptions and relearning new ones. As I mentioned, it's a transformational process. Just as Christ does this work in our life as an individual through the sanctification process, so leaders are called upon to facilitate such a transformational change in the churches and the organizations which God has called them to serve. For example, when a person joins a church or organization, they hear what people say. They observe how people interrelate with each other, and they intuitively feel certain feelings. They get a feeling of the place. These are the visible aspects of the group and reflect how it views the mandate of the church. They are the most obvious aspects of the culture of the church. However, these observable actions are not the foundation of the culture, but merely what is visible above the surface, as we saw in the diagram I just mentioned. What is not so obvious are the values and the assumptions upon which these activities are based. Then through repetition over decades often, the assumptions and the values of the group become the norms and the beliefs that guide the church. These assumptions are at a pretty deep level, and underlying assumptions are values that have been so taken for granted that there's really little variation within the group regarding these. The way we do things around here then is based upon these unspoken assumptions. They're really not open for debate anymore. They have become the non-negotiables of the group.
Listeners of our Leadership Matters podcast have exclusive access to our free bonus leadership materials, which include our MQ assessments as well as his Developing Others workshop. Just click the link in the description or go to our website, icmcanada.org/mentoring-intelligence. If you would like to take a deeper dive into this topic, click on the link in the description box where you can download Phil's Mentoring Intelligence book and the workbook. In it, he discusses the key factors that affect our mentoring intelligence and then offers a practical mentoring model which leaders have been using for decades around the world. The Mentoring Through Intentional Relationship Guides are a practical model to actually help you mentor someone. They are available in several languages and over the years have been used by thousands of leaders. The content, discussion questions, and other tools are designed to assist you in mentoring a potential leader and are available at icmcanada.org/resources.
Then if a culture develops its hindered mentoring relationships, then as leaders we need to work on first changing the values and those assumptions. Leaders who are not even aware of the culture in their church can be frustrated by the way things are done around there without understanding what is behind those actions. They are then controlled by what may seem abstract forces which they cannot define. As you probably noticed, this is what I've been trying to do in this series. It's not effective long term to just try mentoring without having certain change of values in our own heart and our own lives. Well, the obvious next question is, what are the characteristics of an organization that encourages mentoring types of relationships? While the details and mechanics of mentoring relationships are important and for them to be successful, and we also have to deal with the underlying values, both in our own lives as well as the organization as a whole in which we are embedded. Certain characteristics are essential in order to encourage mentoring types of relationships within churches and organizations. They must be open and frequent communication interactions between leaders at different ministry stages must permeate the organization for this to be effective. This fosters then cohesive teamwork rather than a competitive culture. However, if there's low trust and minimal communication, it really makes mentoring types of relationships in the organization virtually impossible. When there's a culture of closed or superficial communication and lack of trust for leadership, mentoring relationships will invariably struggle. If there's distinct levels of superior and subordinate type of relationships which allow for minimal communication, there will likely not be the level of trust necessary for open and authentic type of relationships, which of course mentoring are part of that. How the transition of leadership occurs is also an indicator of the type of relationships that are valued in the church or organization. If those currently in power attempt to retain their position as long as possible, they'll thwart any attempt by the next generation to become involved. This leads younger leaders to have to prove themselves and expend great amounts of energy and time in order to push past these obstacles set up by the older leaders. Many times, the younger generation will just give up in the process. Unfortunately, many of our churches and Christian organizations share more of the values of King Saul's court than we would actually care to admit. But as leaders, we can make a positive impact on the culture of our churches and ministries. This begins with our own values being transformed to line up with Jesus' teaching on kingdom leadership. Then we can be change agents in our own organizations through teaching and modeling kingdom values. This includes being aware of what we focus on and what we pay attention to, as well as what we measure and what behavior we reward publicly and privately. What do we reinforce and give exposure to from the platform or in our leadership meetings? How does what we do in a crisis reflect our values? How do we allocate our resources, both financial ones and human ones? That speaks volumes as to what our values are. Are we investing in others and releasing them in ministry? Is that being financed or championed through the church and through the organization? See, what we model as leaders makes a huge impact on our organizations. The only way people will know what our values are and what kingdom leadership values are is by looking at our actions. They can't look in my heart and see it, they can see it through my actions. I used to travel to Russia several times a year to teach young leaders at a seminary in Moscow. On one occasion, I just finished teaching on servant leadership in the morning and how the relationships in the body of Christ are different than what we observe in the culture around us. Well, we then took a break for lunch and we all went to the cafeteria at the seminary, and I was ushered into a separate kind of a special room just for the professors and our international team. It was kind of on an elevated platform area, a closed room behind glass French doors. From there we could see the students and they could see us, but we had kind of our own private conversation going on. Well, if you know anything about me, you know how uncomfortable I felt, particularly since I just finished teaching that relationships in the body are to be different than in the world, and not hierarchical, not a separation. Well, I only lasted about one meal. The next day I mentioned to the school leadership, the local leadership, that I recognized the honor, of course, that they were trying to bestow on us, and we appreciated that, but would it be okay if our team would sit with the students during the meals? Again, I'm not saying this local team was necessarily hierarchical or had any wrong motives. It was just a culture that had developed for whatever reason that they never really thought about too much anymore. But in my opinion, looking from the outside, it was sending a wrong message. And as a consultant, you can see things from the outside often and provide some feedback. And so it was, in my opinion, creating a disconnect between my words, what I was saying and my teaching, and my actions. So with their blessing, and as I said, I didn't want to offend my host, our team began to sit with the students. Did it change the whole world? Well, no, probably not. But how are others going to see what kingdom leadership looks like except through our actions? Considering everything, we do through Jesus' grid of servant leadership is essential. So the next day, I even got our international team into the kitchen to wash the students' dishes. The only way we can communicate what kingdom leadership looks like is to show it in practical ways. Unfortunately, serving means getting your hands dirty sometimes. Whenever I'm in Africa, they like to frequently throw my doctoral title around. They like to want to always carry my bags and basically make me feel like the chief, right? I understand they're being respectful and it's just part of their culture. But sometimes it can go a little too far. And when does respect cross the line so that others no longer see us as the type of leaders that Jesus was being in Philippians 2, taking on the nature of a servant? Words aren't enough. Actions are needed to show others. And often, I have to be honest, there's a little bit of pushback because these are very countercultural, even countercultural in the church. That's really not much different than it was what Jesus experienced with his disciples, is it? Same thing we experience today. And I've experienced in every culture. I may not be able to change the whole world, I understand that, but I can change my world. So while I'm still able, I try to carry my own bags, and I do whatever I can to metaphorically step off of the platform, so to speak. So that my sinful nature doesn't get used to it, and I don't start feeling entitled and starting to expect this special treatment. It's kind of a dangerous place to be as a leader. Back to the cafeteria in Moscow. Well, on a subsequent trip a few months later, I noticed that the special room now was empty. And the leadership was interspersed throughout the students during the meals. You see, in a simple way, the leadership was breaking down this natural barrier and power differential that's there. We have to be intentional about breaking that down. It did not negatively impact their teaching authority or what they were trying to do, but hopefully it made them more accessible and credible on the topic of servant leadership. As we translate our values into actions, we can then change the culture of our organizations. But what happens if you're in a church or organization that has a culture of throwing spears that's not conducive to mentoring relationships? What do you do if you're in a situation where you cannot find a mentor? These are real-world challenges we have to face. There was once a young man in this very situation, dodging spears in a king's court. Next time, we're going to look at what he did and what we can learn from him. I sure hope you're going to join me next time. But before we get there, I'd like to leave you a few leadership matters to consider. What are some of the assumptions and values of the organization or culture that you lead or that you're part of? What are some of the accepted practices that are actually working against members developing these mentoring type of relationships? What practical actions can you take in your group that will communicate you value mentoring relationships?
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters. If this has been helpful, please remember to like, subscribe, and share us. Doing this will enable others to benefit from this material as well. If you would like to partner with us to provide these materials to leaders who cannot afford them, please go to icmcanada.org/donation.